So what is SBIR and STTR? So this is a federal program that gives deep tech founders access to up to $2 million in non-dilutive funding, meaning that you keep full ownership of your company. So there's no equity, no repayment, no strings attached. So this program has been running for over 40 years, and it has funded thousands of startups every year across every major federal agency. It's helped launch companies that went on to build household names. And most technical founders either have never heard of this program or they only have a very vague sense of how to access it. So in this video, I'm going to give you a simple explanation of SBIR and STTR, what they actually are, what they fund, who qualifies to apply for this program, how they work, and whether this program could be right for your startup. So my name is Colleen Spiegel. I'm actually trained as a chemical and electrical engineer, but I've spent the last 10 years advising over 175 deep tech startups through federal funding processes, and I've reviewed hundreds of NSF, DOE, and NIH proposals. So let me help you save the confusion I see a lot of founders go through when they first come across these programs. So first, we're going to cover the basics, what SBIR and STTR actually are. So SBIR stands for Small Business Innovation Research Grant, and STTR stands for Small Business Technology Transfer Grant. So both of these are federal programs created specifically for early stage research and development in small businesses. So these programs were actually created in 1982 under the Small Business Innovation Development Act, and they were built on a simple but powerful idea. Small businesses are uniquely capable of turning innovative research into commercial products, and the federal government should invest in that capacity because it'll benefit not just that small business, but society at large. So today, 11 federal agencies provide funding for this program. They participate in SBIR and STTR programs. Some of the agencies include the Department of Defense, the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Energy, the Department of Education, NASA, Department of Agriculture, and there's several others. So each agency sets aside a certain portion of its research and development budget, which is about 3.2% for SBIR and 0.45% for STTR. And this is specifically for small business awards. So this adds up to several billion per year in non-dilutive funding available to qualifying small businesses. So the program was just reauthorized back in April through September 30th, 2031. There was a 6-month disruption, but the program is now fully active and agencies are issuing solicitations and deadlines are already approaching. So what does the funding actually support? The SBIR and STTR fund research and development, the type of high risk, high reward work that's too early for private investors, but too applied for traditional academic research grants. So this is a sweet spot where the technology has commercial potential, but it still needs significant R&D, like the creation of a minimum viable prototype to show investors that it's worth investing in. So who qualifies for these grants? Before you get excited about this type of funding, let me cover eligibility because there are specific requirements and not every company meets it. For SBIR, your company must be a for-profit small business with fewer than 500 employees. A lot of these small businesses have fewer than 5 employees. So subsidiaries and affiliates count toward the number. So make sure you just calculate that number correctly. And you need to be at least 51% owned and controlled by a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, or by another eligible small business that meets that criteria. So the small business must also have its principal place of business in the United States. And at least 2/3 of the phase 1 work has to be performed within the company, meaning you can't outsource the majority of the research to a university or a contractor. For STTR, the requirements are similar, but there's one addition. You must have a formal partnership with a nonprofit research institution, which is usually a university, but sometimes it's a federal research laboratory or another similar organization. At least 30% of the funded work, it's usually 33% for phase one, is performed by that partner institution, and you need a written agreement defining the division of work and intellectual property rights before you submit. So this partnership requirement is the defining difference between SBIR and STTR, and it's the first question to ask when deciding which program to pursue. So if you could still team up with a university and spend less than 30% of your budget on a nonprofit research institution, but that would still fall under actually the SBIR category. So one more eligibility note that trips up a lot of founders is that your company must be registered and active on sam.gov. So this is the federal government system for award management before you submit any proposal. So on my YouTube channel, I also have a video series on sam.gov registration, and I have a book on Amazon on performing this registration. This is critical because this registration can take up to 4 weeks to be approved, and a lot of new founders don't realize this, and they put together a proposal and then they're unable to submit it. So don't fall into that trap. So this is how the funding works. There's 3 phases. SBIR and STTR funding has these 3 phases, and this is essential to understanding how they represent the complete pathway from basically idea to minimum viable product to commercial prototype. So phase 1 is about feasibility. It's usually 6 to 12 months. And the questions that phase 1 answers are, is this technology scientifically and technically feasible? The awards for phase 1 typically range from about 150,000 to 305,000. Sometimes it could be up to 400,000 with a waiver for certain agencies. You're only expected to have a minimum viable product at the end of this phase, so not a final finished product. You're just demonstrating that the technical approach is viable. The next phase, phase 2, is about development. If phase 1 proves feasibility, phase 2 funds the full research and development effort to bring the technology to a prototype or near commercial state. So phase 2 awards are usually between 750,000 to about 1.25 million. I've seen higher ones also from NIH, and this is usually for a period of 24 months. So not every phase 1 awardee receives phase 2 funding. This is a 2-step proposal process. So you have to have a proposal to submit to phase 1 and have a second proposal to submit for phase 2. So the phase 2 funding, the competition continues and only the strongest projects advance to that phase. Phase 3 is commercialization, and I think them calling this third phase 3 is a little confusing because this is where the technology moves from the government-funded R&D phase into the commercial marketplace or into federal procurement. But there's no SBIR, STTR funding for phase 3. That's why I think it's a little confusing. If there's still development that needs to be conducted or clinical trials, sometimes that's supported by investors or some other source of funds. So they're expecting you to have, if you need it, private investment, government contracts, or commercial revenue during the phase 3 period. The role of the government actually ends at phase 2. So the total funding pathway, phase 1 plus phase 2, is about $2 million total in non-dilutive capital. For a deep tech startup, this means you have to prove out your technology before it's attractive to private investors. And so this is an extraordinary research to do that. So there are some federal agencies that offer another option called fast track. This actually is a combined phase 1 and phase 2 into one submission. And then there's also phase 2B, a supplement, sometimes up to 500,000 for companies that show strong commercial traction. So NSF is newly offering a strategic breakthrough award up to $30 million for exceptional phase 2 awardees. But this part is by invitation only by the program managers. So what agencies fund what? So one of the most important decisions in the SBIR process is choosing the right agency. Each agency has different topic areas, different priorities, and different review cultures. So the Department of Defense is the largest SBIR funder. It accounts for roughly half of all SBIR awards. So the Department of Defense includes the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, DARPA, and several other components, and that they all issue individual solicitations actually. So if your technology has any dual or defense use purpose, the DoD is worth some serious attention. The National Science Foundation funds deep technologies based on scientific and commercial merit, but they're less focused on specific application areas like the Department of Defense, and they're more interested in fundamental innovation. So NSF is really well suited for university spinouts and technologies that represent genuine scientific advances. The National Institutes of Health funds health-related technologies, medical devices, diagnostics, therapeutics, digital health, and related areas. NIH has the most rigorous review process and the longest timelines, also some very large awards. So the Department of Energy funds clean energy, advanced manufacturing, grid technology, and related areas. And the DOE also recently eliminated their preliminary proposal, which was called the Letter of Intent for Phase 1. So it's a little bit more accessible than before. ARPA-H, the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, they fund high-risk, high-reward health technologies with a faster, more flexible process than traditional NIH procedures. And there's other agencies such as the Department of Transportation, the Department of Education, USDA, NOAA. They fund SBIR awards for their specific research areas and interest domains. So the key is matching your technology to the agency whose mission it serves. I have dedicated videos on this channel for the NSF process and the current solicitation landscape, and some links in this description. So if you're a deep tech founder with a technology that still needs research and development before it's ready for market, and you want to fund that development without giving up equity, SBIR and STTR are worth understanding deeply. But I want to tell you that these programs are not simple. I mean, there's a lot of material online that I'm not in favor of because they act like these programs are simple. Winning these requires rigorous proposals, strong commercialization plans, and a clear understanding of what each agency is looking for. But the reward is up to $2 million in non-dilutive funding. So this is worth the investment if you're very serious about developing your deep tech or your high technology. So I've written 6 books on federal funding strategy and commercialization planning. So if you've purchased one of these, I really appreciate you. The Startup's Guide to Winning Non-Dilutive Funding covers the complete SBIR and STTR process in detail. So I have a link in the description of this video. And I also am offering a grant writing challenge at SEMSCIO.com that walks you through building a complete competitive proposal section by section, and I'll provide feedback, email-based feedback with that program. So please subscribe to this channel for videos, the next video in the series. We'll cover exactly how much money you can get from SBIR at each phase and which agencies are offering the largest rewards. My name is Colleen Spiegel, and I'll see you in the next video.